Tonight, here in Cairo, President Mubarak goes on the air to say he is willing to leave, but that's not until elections in September. And for a massive, angry crowd, for most of them, that's not good enough. Meanwhile, back in the U.S., another monster storm churning from west to east, another potential history maker. Nightly News begins now.
Rage and revolution. The Middle East in crisis. This is a special edition of NBC Nightly News with Brian Williams, reporting from Cairo.
And good evening once again from Cairo. We mentioned at the top of the broadcast there, while the big story across much of the U.S. is a big storm, here it's the continuing big storm of protest and another big day here in the life of this uprising. That huge gathering in Liberation Square that's been promised for days, billed as the million-plus person march here. And then the second big event of the day happened tonight, Egypt time, when President Hosni Mubarak took to the airwaves. This whole protest has been about getting him out of office. Tonight, he said he intends to do that and not stand again for re-election. Problem is, he doesn't intend to do that until September, and for these angry demonstrators, that is not good enough. For some of them, tomorrow wouldn't be soon enough. We have this city covered, this region, and this story. Our team of correspondents is here and in place, led by our chief foreign correspondent, Richard Engel, who was out in it with us all day. Richard, good evening.
Good evening, Brian. President Mubarak seemed to offer concessions, but to many people here, it looked like he was taking a very hard line. Many Egyptians tonight worried that there will be more violence ahead. In a highly anticipated television address, Mubarak announced he would not seek re-election in September and would set unspecified term limits. I will work for the remaining months in my term to guarantee the peaceful transition of power, he said. But Mubarak also hinted a crackdown could be coming. He stressed his ties to the army and said Egypt must choose between chaos and stability. Mubarak said he would die in Egypt. The protesters expected much more. The reaction here has been immediate and angry. People say Mubarak must leave now and that there can be no other concession. Many of the demonstrators say the 82-year-old Mubarak's concession that he will not stand for another 6-year term is no concession at all.
We reject all his said. We want he get out our countries.
The demonstrators feel they have momentum and Mubarak on the ropes after gathering hundreds of thousands of people today in Cairo's main Tahrir Square. Earlier in the day, the mood was like a carnival. Families were out together for the first time. But the protesters are giving Mubarak a deadline. The protests today have mostly been peaceful, but demonstrators warn if Mubarak doesn't step down by Friday, they will resume clashes. But who's organizing this revolution? And how do you set up a million-strong protest when the government has cut the internet? I was surprised when I visited the protesters' tiny control room, an office with just 10 volunteers. This operation is run by a soft-spoken 36-year-old English teacher named Amal Sharaf.
Mubarak has to depart and leave the country and make new presidential elections and fair elections.
A single mother, Sharaf has been awake for 24 hours and makes hundreds of cell phone calls a day.
Just think about it. 10 people. A mother of a 10-year-old girl. Another bunch of college-educated young people. You're organizing a revolt here in Cairo, a revolution.
Yes.
Can you
we
understand?
ourselves don't believe this.
Oh, do you think it will work?
I think it will go far, but we didn't think it would go that far.
The protests are continuing, and unlike earlier in the day, now are furious. Already tonight, there have been some clashes between Mubarak's supporters and protesters. Brian, take a look at what happened tonight after Mubarak's speech in Alexandria. Many here feel this could get violent even before Friday.
And this was the first clash we've seen, violent clash, since the initial clashes here Friday night, where we had the fires, the tear gas. This got very rough there in Alexandria tonight, as we see in what was live coverage again in the moments following Mubarak's speech. Richard Engel heading up our team of coverage here on the ground tonight. Richard, thanks as always. And make no mistake, most of the protesters in the crowd would like President Obama of the U.S. to come out boldly, support their cause, and ask Mubarak to leave office right now. Diplomacy doesn't work that way. A lot of other American allies are watching the Americans very closely to see how they treat their friends. We did, however, late tonight hear from the president. White House correspondent Savannah Guthrie is there with what he said. Savannah, good evening.
Good evening to you, Brian. We have now heard from the president, and he did not call for Hosni Mubarak to step down right away. He actually watched the Mubarak speech in the Situation Room today and then spoke to the president of Egypt for about 30 minutes afterwards. The president said tonight that Mubarak realizes the status quo is not sustainable and a change must take place.
It is not the role of any other country to determine Egypt's leaders. Only the Egyptian people can do that. What is clear, and what I indicated tonight to President Mubarak, is my belief that an orderly transition must be meaningful, it must be peaceful, and it must begin now.
So the president saying the transition must start now, but stopped short of saying Mubarak must leave office right now. The administration actually dispatched a veteran diplomat, Frank Wisner, to carry a message straight to Mubarak saying don't run for re-election in September. The message was delivered. Mubarak obviously said that tonight, but it's not good enough for most demonstrators in Cairo. And the president appealed to them directly tonight saying, we hear your voices. Brian?
All right, Savannah Guthrie at the White House, a still developing angle of this story tonight. Savannah, thanks. This evening I spoke by telephone to Dr. Mohammed Al-Baradei, who is back here in his native Cairo. He spent years living in other countries, part of that in the United States. He's been a negotiator, a diplomat, and he is back here offering himself as perhaps a consensus candidate for the very vocal majority in a post-Mubarak era. He had some tough words tonight over the phone. He told me the Mubarak speech extended the agony. He called it an act of deception on the part of Mubarak. Finally, he called Mubarak a dead man walking, and those are weighty words in this region. Earlier today, I spoke with Dr. Al-Baradei at his house and asked him about this candidacy of his. How do you view your own, whether we call it candidacy, if it isn't you emerging as a leader of a new Egypt? Are there individuals you'd be perfectly happy to see?
I'll be perfectly happy, Brian, that I'll be so quote-unquote agent for change. See my Egypt going from where we are, to where we should be. I'll be perfectly happy, frankly, if anybody else would take it from there. I'm not necessarily interested in running the country. I'm interested in seeing this country, at this stage of my life, catching up, being part of the big human family I'm used to. I've lived in the U.S. for 15 years. I've lived in Europe for 25 years. I've lived in democracies. This is, to me, is without democracy, there's no life. So the issue of who is going to run doesn't really matter. The important thing is how he is going to be chosen.
Look at your country right now. There's no internet service. Commerce has ground to a halt. Stores are closed. Nothing's happening. The price of oil is spiking. Tourism, people are trying to get out, not come in.
Sure.
How long can this go on?
It can't last for very long. The country is going down the drain, and I think unless Mubarak understands that he needs to go by the end of the week, my fear that this whole situation will go bloody. And again, I continue to appeal to him and people around him that he needs to go. He is the major part of the solution. Once he is out, everything else will go back to normal.
Just one of the men who may emerge in the vacuum, Dr. Mohammed Al-Baradei, earlier today. One more note from this region tonight. It's been said that this movement may not stop here, that other governments had something to fear. Saudi Arabia has been mentioned. Jordan's been mentioned. Well, today, Jordan's king dissolved his government, is replacing the prime minister. It's seen by most people in this region as a kind of canny preemptive move, and it's been said that if the king of Egypt had done what the king of Jordan did today a few weeks back, he might have avoided all these troubles. Back here in Cairo, all of us today spent a good bit of time at ground level, walking with, meeting, talking to the Egyptians who have come out as citizen protesters. A lot of them young and old, a lot of them brought family members with them, some of them brought children with them. And Lester Holt, here with us as part of our team, did the very same thing today. Lester, we've been seeing their faces, hearing their voices from a bit of a distance as they go by en masse. You got to know several today and talked about their motivation.
Well, we keep looking beyond the crowd to the question of who's really leading this democracy movement. When you look at the protesters, though, they seem to be the ones that are moving President Mubarak toward the exit. So it's the people, really, who seem to be charting this course.
A new sense of empowerment on the streets of Cairo tonight. Egyptians speaking as one against President Mubarak are finding their voice.
We are just like a big family, and we want one thing. We all agree upon this thing, that he has to quit, he has to leave.
This new political awakening has stunned people like 23-year-old interior designer Marian El-Kwesni, who this morning marched to Tahrir Square, never imagining she or her country could stand up like this.
This is the best thing that ever happened. It's just brought everyone together in a very unplanned, unscripted way.
Like Mariam, Hatim Abu Aline is part of the generation who has only known one president and now yearns to taste democracy, and thus can't quite imagine what change and choice will look like.
We're just hoping for the best. We have one problem now, and we stated the problem. We're trying to overcome it. What comes next, we'll be ready for it. I think all these people will be ready for it.
This crowd is realizing that what they are experiencing now is, in fact, a taste of freedom, the thing they crave. It's what happens next that daunts many of them. As one man told me in my entire lifetime, I've never been allowed to think for myself, and maybe finally I will.
Egypt's young, in particular, have suffered high unemployment under the Mubarak government. Mohammed had to skip today's rally to try and sell enough sandwiches on the street to eke out a living. I want to get married, but how can I? I earn $100 a month, he tells me. Life is very difficult. Tonight, the protesters feel closer than ever to achieving political change and what they hope will be better lives for all Egyptians, even though many of them have never witnessed change for themselves.
Hard to see sometimes in the sea of humanity when you look at the people in that square, but Brian, in the middle of it all is a grassy area, and there are tents. There are people who set up camp day one, and they vow not to leave until President Mubarak leaves.
They're going to live there until there's someone else living in the presidential palace. Lester Holt, thanks. The crowd stays at it even this late at night. We'll take a break. When we come back, more of our coverage from here and of the rest of the day's news. Back here in Cairo, you may have heard reports about what's happening with oil prices. They're up. All those of us in the United States know what that means. We also know it's starting here, and CNBC's Aaron Burnett, part of our team here. How does this all happen?
Well, the Suez Canal is just simply a crucial artery. It's from east to west. All that Middle Eastern oil has to go somewhere. It goes through the Suez Canal. You're talking about tankers that carry 1 million barrels apiece going through this canal, and concerns about delays have driven oil prices higher, Brian. It's interesting, though, that traders tell me that if we were to see a full halt at the Suez Canal, you could see oil prices go as high as $120 a barrel. Right now, we're more close to 90. So that would just gives you a sense of how important these far corners of the world are. The Suez Canal matters a lot.
It says nothing about the other jitters throughout this region in other countries as well. When we come back, what it's like to a veteran of these streets to walk among the protesters here. Back here in Cairo tonight, all of us on our team here on the ground spent a lot of time on these streets today, out with the people looking at this protest, seeing it, hearing it. For part of that time, I was with our chief foreign correspondent, Richard Engel, who lived and worked here for many years, to try to see what he sees here going on. This is part of the economy that has popped up to service the protest.
Well, this is just new today, where people are, you can tell it's starting, there's an air of permanence to this. People are serving tea, you know, sodas. This is all new. Before, the protests were much more violent. I mean, there was tear gas in here. You couldn't stay, let alone, you know, serve tea.
All right, let's go to the ID check. What does that banner say, hanging down from the highway overpass?
It says, Yuskut, Yuskut, Hosni Mubarak. Down, down, Hosni Mubarak.
Okay.
So that has been a constant chant here.
Can you talk us through here?
Salam alaikum, Ustaz.
Okay, good to go. Thanks. No, I'm good. Okay.
Please. Look, they want to make sure that people don't have weapons. And this, you know, when people get empowered, everyone takes charge.
Everyone's now, we've gone from an unorganized protest to a
hyper-organized protest.
A hyper-organized, and everyone is appointing themselves as a volunteer.
Everyone's a volunteer, everyone's a leader, everyone's in charge.
We're entering the final funnel. This is one way in.
This is
the
primary way in. This is the Egyptian Museum. You can see there's some armed guards on the roof.
This is where most of the great antiquities are housed.
This is one of the best museums in the world.
There's no mechanism to address all the people, correct? There's no loudspeakers.
There are different little loudspeakers, but there's no one central PA system.
They're making a sign on their way in. Everyone is expressing something. Part of the hours we spent walking around this city, and hours later, late at night, below us here, they're still going. That's going to do it for our broadcast for this Tuesday night. I'm Brian Williams, reporting again tonight from Cairo on behalf of our entire team. We hope to see you right back here tomorrow evening. Good night.